All data needful to the solution of mental action and man's endeavor can be measured as scientific truths. That's the kind of information that's hard to find in the 1960s. But it's a good thing I did. Because ever since I found enlightenment, my life has been renewed. I'm finally serving a higher purpose. You see, it's not about getting the most money or the most things. Only one thing can bring you true fulfillment. Love.
The only thing I'm telling you to do is to think, to use your God-given mind.
A companion peace demonstration brings out 50,000 marchers in downtown San Francisco. They parade.
The tapestry of young Americans throughout the 1960s and 70s was vibrant and peaceful. Not peaceful in the traditional sense, but that was the goal anyways. The U.S. began sending ground troops to Vietnam in 1965, and the inhumanity of it all inspired protests across the nation in lots of different forms.
I'd love to be stoned on acid.
How do you know God may cut you off?
Each behavior was characterized as part of the counterculture. These trends were steeped in anti-establishment beliefs, which makes sense considering how established the previous generation was.
Almost overnight, suburbia was born.
In the past 2 years alone, our population has increased by 5 million.
To find out my reasons on rock and roll music and why I preach against it, and I believe with all of my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
Granted, both lifestyles resulted from times of war, but where post-World War II society sought refuge in reverent tradition, Vietnam War society reveled in utopia, psychic phenomena, and alternative spirituality. New religious movements became very popular in the United States, with as much as 10 million Americans having had some involvement by 1978. Scholars correlate charisma.
What do you think it is about you that makes people want to be a part of whatever it is you're a part of?
I'm brand new.
Heresy.
Take your glasses off. Let's just dare in our faith.
Antinomianism.
6 words. Turn on. Tune in. Drop out.
Gnosticism.
So, who wants to ask for the knowing today?
And revitalization.
Hallelujah. Going up into the sky. I'm going up.
With these popular movements, they fit perfectly into the popular narrative of that time because of their rejection of mainstream values. Also, an alarming number of aspiring messiahs saw the social unrest of the 1960s America as an opportunity to spread enlightenment. Dogmatically, this meant a foundation on Christianity, Korean spirituality, Hinduism, or Satan. They promoted peace, mainstream rejection, unity, and much more. Practically, this meant communal living, psychoactive substances, incessant reading of holy text, and abandoning your belongings. The previous generation's adherence to Protestantism meant that their kids, now 18 to 25-year-olds, were raised believing that the end goal was spiritual enlightenment, but they were disillusioned by the impersonality of the traditional church. But this variety promised a sense of belonging in a communal lifestyle and a tangible societal change, at least starting out. And better yet, it was protected by the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. Perhaps the most controversial belief held by these groups was the requirement to abandon your friends and family as a way to show devotion. Now, if you weren't part of the 10 million Americans involved with these movements, then there was a good chance that you were one of their parents, in which case you would call them a cult. Those who held the traditional 1950s values were disapproving of pretty much everything alternative at that time, but stable family was priority number one in a lot of cases. Suddenly and without warning, their child would call, claiming they have realized their true purpose as the handiwork of the alien race Elohim to promote global peace. And just like that, they'd be gone. Not missing, not kidnapped, not minors, just gone with no one to help. That is, until Ted Patrick. Ted Patrick was the special rep for community relations for Governor Ronald Reagan and living in San Diego when a distressed woman came into his office in July 1972. Her son called after having been missing for 5 days. He found his spiritual family and was not going to come home. Ted had a similar experience with his son, who came home late having encountered the same group, the Children of God. They proselytized near Mission Beach, professing the power and mercy of God and denouncing the evils of this world. Ted decided that the only thing to do was to join. When he did, He was met with constant pleasantries and biblical reading as he was brought back to their shared house that was littered with functional cars and appliances. The house had no air conditioning, and there was no food or water provided. Inside, everyone read the good word while declaring their assets and pressured to give them to God. Ted was reminded of the horror stories from the returning Korean War soldiers from 1953. They were subjected to starvation, psychological manipulation, torture, and political indoctrination until they agreed to sign anti-American statements and confessions. Some thought that these statements were made out of survival, while others believed that they were brainwashed. This sensationalized term can mean anything from forceful coercion to mind control, and Ted was definitely under the latter persuasion. So he created a new science called deprogramming. The idea was that you would pay the experts anywhere from $7,500 to $25,000 to abduct your child and take them to an undisclosed location for 3 to 7 days. There was constant supervision and intervention. The goal was to confuse and harass the member until they didn't know what they were doing or saying. The intervention would include verbal abuse, destruction of the member's belongings, and lies about the cult. They weren't allowed to sleep, and they had limited access to food and water.
The first crisis comes some 2 hours out of Seattle during a refueling stop. Kathy cries to the gas station owner that she's being kidnapped.
But because there were no other tangible solutions in the early 1970s, his work was met with great success. He managed to personally deprogram as many as 2,000 people over the course of his career. He started locally in California, but then formalized his practices into an organization called the Freedom of Thought Foundation in the mid-1970s. Other people soon became zealous deprogrammers. Ted toured the country, restoring autonomy to hundreds of young adults across the United States. As you can imagine, the work raised some legal concerns. In 1975, Ted was convicted in Colorado and California because of unlawful imprisonment. He was also facing legal challenges in places like Michigan and Florida.
When I went to prison, I deprogrammed my officer wife.
Ted's deprogramming declined in the early to mid-1980s. But his philosophies did transform and pioneer an entire anti-cult movement. Exit counseling groups like the Family Research Council and the American Family Foundation became more popular. They took effective elements of Ted's work, the reasonable intervention, and abandoned the psychological torture. But Ted's work actually had a bigger impact than just the work with his ex-cult members. His popularity and controversy promoted the idea that cults were going to brainwash your children. The fear around that time was palpable.
Will you answer?
One example of this case is Peterson versus Sorleen. In 1982, Sandra Peterson, a member of the Unification Church in the 1970s, was deprogrammed. While she initially seemed to respond positively, she later sued her parents. The courts actually ruled in favor of her parents. Much of the mainstream society truly believed that brainwashing robbed people of their free will. However, after the Vietnam War ended on April 30th, 1975, the cult scare turned into the cult caricature. As the broader message of peace began to show its true self, the movement lost its appeal and many of its followers. The leaders lost their charisma and replaced it with financial extortion and sexual abuse. The image of the hippie was chastised and commodified, indicating that society dismissed the messages these groups were trying to spread.
This fella that was doing the talking had a haircut like Tarzan, he walked like Jane, and smelled like Cheetah.
So in a roundabout way, the perception of Ted's work was the catalyst that led America to agree that these groups were nothing more than an unnecessary danger.
It's rather stupid to me.
It's no good.
They're taking it in sugar cubes, it's being dropped into their punch.
Well, truthfully, my friend, I know nothing about it. Only what I've read in the paper, what I see on television, and that's about all.
The inhumanity of deprogramming showed that research on brainwashing was still in its infancy.
Really, I could show you some photographs of dry, chapped brains that would make your stomach creep.
Since then, the courts have moved away from permitting brainwashing as an admissible defense, and the Daubert standard required that evidence be based on peer-reviewed research, reliable methodology, and general acceptance. Also, forceful deprogramming is now outlawed, and things like the Religious Freedom Restoration Act strengthened the legal protection of religious freedom. But despite all of that, Ted's work is still praised by many. While some ex-cult members have suffered irreparable trauma for their deprogramming, some are grateful for Ted's work.
I'm grateful that he came and intervened at that time and in that place.
Deprogrammers still exist, and some of them even still believe in the brute force method of the early 70s.
My answer today is no, I cannot help you, because those situations would require restraint.
And as long as new religious movements exist, so will the market for cult intervention.